Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Lord. All right. And now let me do a couple of shares here on it, and we can get started. So how did Ojai, California get its name? While we're waiting.
It means like a nest or something.
The nest.
The nest. Okay, so they have eagles or birds or Indians? Okay.
The Chumash Indians.
The
Okay.
Schumash.
Schumash.
The Schuman Indians?
Chumash.
Wow. They named them after me. That's amazing. Wow. Before I came. Yeah, that looks like that will work. So let me share this to my page and to a couple of groups. All right, should be good enough. Alrighty, so what I'm going to do is share my testimony. And who here has heard about me before a week ago? Few. So most of you in the last week have heard, right? Okay, good. So this will be new to you. So I grew up on a farm in Indiana. Actually, I grew up in a small town, but we moved out to the farm when I was 5. Columbia City, Indiana is the name of the town, west of Fort Wayne, north of Indianapolis, Indiana. And we had a 160-acre farm, had pigs, cattle. I was in 4-H. Anybody here have 4-H or was in 4-H?
Yes.
So head, heart, hands, health, 4-H. And so I learned responsibility and leadership through a lot of times the 4-H stuff we did. I was also in Future Farmers of America, even though I did not want to be a farmer at all. I hated the farm life, but it taught me how to work hard. It taught me how to bale hay when it's 100 degrees and have green boogers afterwards. And it was just disgusting, and manure and cleaning up stuff. And we had cattle and stuff. So anyways, Columbia City, Indiana. Who here has ever heard of Mariah Woodworth-Etter?
Yeah.
Marie Woodworth-Etter.
Yes.
So she was one of the most anointed women ever in the United States history. And back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, signs, miracles, wonders. She was able to translate the different parts of the world and stay in the same position for like 3 days. And then the media would poke pins in her because they thought she was faking. And she wasn't. She wasn't in her body. She was somewhere else. So it was pretty wild. Well, she was from Ohio. And I believe she had been married at least 2 times, I think maybe even 3 times. I think she lost some children. So she had a lot of family stuff, which oftentimes the Lord uses those most anointedly, those that have gone through the most extreme stuff. You know, it makes sense. If you've never gone through anything, then how can you relate to the rest of the world? So ultimately, she went through a lot of stuff, and she was trying to get people saved. And the Lord told her to start doing healings. And she's like, I want to deal with a bunch of cripples. And the Lord's like, hello, those cripples will become Christians when you get them healed. So I want you to pray for the sick. So she started doing that in the hometown that I grew up in, Columbia City, Indiana. And she did it for 4 weeks. She was there. And then she got ordained at the local Church of God that was there. And I went to nursery school at the Church of God. My mom played the piano and the organ there at the church. So some interesting ties. And I didn't even know anything about her till 2009. You know, because I ran in, I mean, I didn't run really into any Christian circles. I grew up with a good mom, good dad. My grandmother was weird because she had a deliverance ministry, and she had Jezebel, she had demons, she was controlling, manipulative. She was probably 5'2" and had like a 6'3" husband who was in World War II, big, strong guy, and but he would call her mother. Mother, what mother wants, we have to do. And so we have to walk on eggshells around her. He would control her. She would control him, I mean. And so ultimately, we went over to their house and stuff. We had to be nice. We have to walk on eggshells and be all nice, because otherwise, that's just the way grandma is. We all probably have someone like that in our family. So that's just the way they are. It's like, well, no, they've got these spirits on them, is what's causing them to behave not normal, not at peace, not loving. But I didn't know any of that. I just looked at the outside. So ultimately, when I was 13, she prayed for me to receive my prayer language. I received it. So I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? And she's like, well, just pray for it. You know, when you don't know what to pray for, pray in tongues. I'm like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing, but so I did that occasionally. It's like, it's supposed to be good for you, like the life cereal for Mikey. You know, eat the cereal, it's supposed to be good for you. So then I got older, decided to go to college at Purdue University, where my dad went, my brothers went. Who here has ever heard of Purdue University? First astronaut, Neil Armstrong, was from Purdue, and a lot of quarterbacks that went into the NFL came from Purdue. Drew Brees, Bob Greasy, Mark Herman, Kyle Orton, just a bunch of different quarterbacks. So I went to Purdue and got a degree, sales and marketing degree. I did not want to do ministry. My grandmother wanted somebody in the family to do ministry. I'm like, I'll be the last one to do ministry. I'll tell you that, because I'm like, I'm not going to be weird like you, and I will never do deliverance, because man, if that's what people do when they have deliverance, I'm like, I don't want what that is. I want to be normal. I want to be normal. I don't want to be weird. So I will never touch deliverance with a 10-foot pole. So then. I got married to a girl. My criteria for marriage at that time was the girl needed to cook, needed to be a Christian, or at least appear to be one, and to be pretty. I wanted a pretty girl. I didn't want a girl that wasn't. So I found a girl that met that criteria, that worked at the church in First Assembly of God in Lafayette, Indiana. And so we got married literally a week after I graduated from Purdue. So I had to take a course that was a pass-fail course that took a lot of pressure, because most people didn't pass it. I found out afterwards, and you take one test, basically, no test the entire semester or whatever, quarter. I guess they had quarters at the time. So anyway, I passed it, got married, and got a job all in the same week.
Oh, my.
And the company I worked for was called Banker Systems, which they wanted me to sell software to banks. So I would go to banks and sell loan software, new account software, and opening up new accounts. And I traveled in Indiana, Illinois, and Kentucky. I was gone Monday through Friday, except for 1 week out of that time frame I was in my Indiana area, so I could stay at home. The other times I had to be gone Monday through Friday. So she got pregnant 6 months after we got married. Then we had the child 9 months after that, and we had another child 19 months after that, and another child 2 years after that. So we had 2 sons and a daughter. Named them Jordan, Austin, and Ashley. I want to name them cool names because, I don't know, I like Michael Jordan, so I named my son Jordan. And there was a basketball player at Purdue named Woody Austin and Chad Austin, so I named my son Austin. And then the third one, my wife wanted to name her Kara. I wanted to name her Ashley, so I got the first name, she got the second name. So, and there's like a gazillion Ashleys, of course, that are out there. In fact, the lady that's at the hotel I'm staying at, her name was Ashley. When she checked me in, I'm like, hey, you got my daughter's name. So anyway, the family started, and then we got along well the first several years. Then when my son was 8, there was a boy that, my oldest son was 8, there was a boy that did something to him sexually, introduced him to stuff he shouldn't have done. So it really started to mess him up, started to mess up my family. He became defiant, he became mean, he became disrespectful, a lot of hell that I went through, and we put him in Christian counseling thinking, well, that's the best way of getting him fixed is Christian counseling. I'll spend thousands of dollars and he'll be really good, hopefully. Well, it didn't happen. He kept getting worse and worse and worse. And they ultimately said he had ADHD. They put him on medications, Strattera, took away the appetite, which he never had an appetite to begin with, so he was a stick. And I took him off of it as soon as I could. My wife was trying to keep him on it, and I was like, no, I don't think this is good. So I took him off it within, I don't know, a month. And then he kept causing strife. My wife and I had arguments, disagreements. They weren't vehement or anything, but disagreements. We went to counseling. Nothing fixed anything. And after 17 years of marriage, she filed for divorce because I didn't want to do it. I didn't believe in that. I'm going to stay married forever was my mantra. But I couldn't stop it, so I did everything I could to delay it, and it delayed for about a year and a half. It was final in June of 2008. And at that point, I was a teacher in church. I taught a lot of kids. The kids loved me. I loved the kids. Everybody wanted to be under my care. Like it was a large church. We went to a non-denominational church, like 3,000 people. So we had maybe, probably 100 kids that were in the age group of my kids. So we'd have maybe 5 of our teachers. And then a lot of the kids would fight over wanting me to teach them because I would joke around, have fun, teach about God as well. But a lot of them were boring, teachers, and I'm like, who wants to be in a boring classroom when they fall asleep, So I could keep them awake at least, and we'd have fun and do things and stuff. So ultimately, I coached my sons in basketball and baseball and stuff. So ultimately, when that happened to my son and the divorce started, then the Lord started speaking to me for the first time that I really could say I heard, and it wasn't audible, but I could hear in my voice. He said, "What is it that you want out of your life?" And at the time, I wanted to be a millionaire because I was like, if you have money, you don't have any problems. You know, people in Hollywood that have money, no one has problems, right? They're all at peace. They love each other. They don't have any divorces. We all want to be like Hollywood. So, and do we have water? Because I'm getting,
Yes.
I forgot about that.
You want me to get it, honey?
Thank you. And so the Lord spoke to me and said, what is it that you want out of your life? At the time, let's see, this is in 2008, so I was 31, born in 67, 77, no, 41 years old. I'm now 51. So I said, Lord, I go, what I want is, I thought it was money, but I said, I'd rather have peace if I have to choose. Because what good is all this money if you don't have peace? I go, I'd prefer to have peace and money, lots of it, you know. But if I have to choose, I will choose peace. So then he said, good choice. He said, that's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to take away all the money that you have. It's going to be gone.
Oh, great.
And he said, I'm going to change you and change your heart in the process so that you have my heart. And then he said, I will repay it back way greater than it was before because you'll use it for kingdom purposes and not just your own selfish purposes. So I'm like, okay, deal. Thinking there is no way I'm going to lose $500,000, you know, because I'm very tight with my money and I'm not going to waste it on stupid things. So anyway, the divorce took 55% of it, so that was quick. That was gone. But the rest of it, I'm like, I am not going to lose the rest of this. I'm really good with my money. And so that was, so that was June 2008. And then the divorce was final in June 2008. Then it was like in August, September, the Lord said, now you're ready to look for your next wife. So I'm like, I am? I'm like, I was waiting for her to come back to her senses, you know, and stay married. And then within like a minute, the Lord's like, yes, you are. And then within a minute, I was like, I am. Oh, right. I'm like, wow, where do you find wives at now? Do I go back to Purdue and go get a grad degree, you know, and find a woman there? Do I go to church? And so I tried church, and they had a singles group there. And when I went to the singles group, there was like all these girls checking out the guys' bodies, and all the guys checking out the girls' bodies. And I'm like, this is ew. This is not pure.
No.
I want a girl that's pure, that's godly. So I'm like, I don't want this. So I've left that. So then I'm like, well, how can I find girls where they can't see me and I can see them? So I become a stalker, you know. So I did all that, and all of a sudden these women start to message, and I'm like, wow, this is fun. This is like high school again, you know. I get a do-over, you know. It was just kind of weird because I'm like, I haven't dated forever, and so it was kind of exciting. Well, then there was a couple women I had dialogues with, and some of them actually wanted to talk to me. And I'm like, really? I'm like, you're kind of forward, you know. I want to keep it like this. This is more my style. And so ultimately, there was one woman that we talked, and within 15 minutes, she said these words to me that nobody ever asked me. The question, she said, are you controlling? I'm like, huh? Controlling? What does that mean? I'm like, controlling of what? You know, my food or I don't know what you're talking about. And she said, well, do you control your spouse? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't think I do. I go, oh, I'm pretty sure I don't. And she goes, well, because I don't want to control you, but I don't want you to control me. I'm like, that was a clue. I didn't pay attention to that. I wasn't very discerning back then. So ultimately, I'm like, okay. So we talked for 3 hours and we got to know each other. This was like this. Well, we ended up meeting December 19th, 2008. And ultimately, the number 19 has become the God's hand of approval that I am in the right place at the right time, that I'm supposed to be there, and that His hand's upon me, and that my faith level is where it needs to be. So I've seen a lot of 19s wherever I go from now on, like on dates and like on roads, and like the GPS is 19 miles, you have to turn off here, people's addresses that have 19 in it, all this stuff. So ultimately, we talked for leading up to Christmas. She invites me to meet her parents. She said her parents were controlling. I'm like, there's that word again, controlling. So I meet the parents. They seem to like me. You know, her dad, he seemed like he could be controlling, could be mean, but he liked me. I mean, everybody likes me. And so ultimately on Christmas Day, she invites me to go to a conference, a Christian conference. A guy by the name of Morris Cerullo. Who here's heard of Morris Cerullo? So I never heard of a Morris Cerullo in my life. I'm like, that's a weird name. Who's a Morris Cerullo, And she said, she goes, he's very anointed, extremely anointed. And for those of you that don't know Morris Cerullo, he lives in San Diego now. He was from New Jersey. He travels all over the world. He's now like 88 or 89. He's probably saved more lives for Christ than Billy Graham. I mean, he's just not as well known because he does it outside the U.S., where Billy Graham did most of his inside the U.S. So ultimately, he was from New Jersey. He was going to kill himself. He was an orphan. The Lord said, if you don't kill yourself, you'll save the lives of millions and millions and millions of people around the world. So anyway, I said, well, who else is going to be at this conference, this Morris Cirillo conference? And I'm like, she's like, well, there's going to be Benny Hinn there. And I'm like, well, I'm familiar with Benny Hinn. John Hagee. I'm like, I know John Hagee. Miles Monroe, I did not know. Reinhard Bonnke, I did not know. Mike Murdoch, BB and CeCe Winans, who I did know. Britt Nicole, who was an upcoming singer at the time out of Nashville. It was in Nashville, Tennessee, where the conference was at. So I agreed to go. It was the following week, over my birthday, which is January 2nd. So we go to the conference, and everything in my life changed from that point forward. I go from the old Nelson Schuman, kid from a cornfield, to now hearing the Lord. And at that conference, the first night there was 3,000 people there, of which probably 2/3 were outside the United States, because most people are outside the U.S. And I remember the first night that we were there, we were probably 2/3 of the way back, and we were worshiping, and I put my hands up to praise the Lord, and all of a sudden my left hand starts to go like this. And it's shaking. And I'm like, what the heck? You know, she told me this is an anointed conference, so maybe that's the anointing, you know. And then like the next song happens, and they're both shaking like this. And I'm like, they've never done that before. This is really weird. So then this girl that I'm trying to impress is looking at my hands, saying, why are your hands shaking? I'm like, I don't know. I go, maybe it's the anointing you told me about. You said he's a very anointed, whatever that means. Like, do they bathe him in anointing oil every day? Is that how he gets his anointing? I don't know, you know, because I did not run in those circles. So she had been to like, I don't know, probably 8 or so of his conferences over the previous couple of years. So ultimately, that next day, they ask us to serve together at this book table. And when we do, people assume that we're married. They come up and say, can you have your wife give me that book? Can you have? I'm like, what? I've only known her for 2 weeks. I'm like, she is not my wife. I don't know what she is, you know. She's an acquaintance, you know. And I don't know, you know. I don't know I don't know what she is to me. So then we end up that night, the second night of the conference. It's like a week-long conference. They have us seated at the front, like the second row, front and center, out of like 60 rows. So here we are, second row, front and center. I'm thinking, what am I doing sitting here? I go, I do not deserve to be here. And the Lord's like, yes, this is where I want you to be. And I'm like, what? I go, I don't even know if I like Morris Cirillo. He's got a weird voice, you know. He's got kind of a squeaky voice, you know. And it's like, hi, this is Morris Cirillo, you know. And I'm like, so anyway, that night, the girl I just met 2 weeks before said, we need to run up to the front because the anointing is so strong at the front. And I'm like, really? Run? I'm like, we could walk and tiptoe and fall backwards and beat everybody else behind us because we're in the second row and everybody's like 75 and older that comes here. So I'm like, I don't think it's going to be hard to beat everybody. So at the end of that service, she like shoves me out and then runs to the front, and I take 5 steps and I'm there. I'm like, yep, there's Morris right there 5 feet from me, you know, standing there. And then I feel like a presence like I've never felt before, like a little mist almost. And I'm like, wow, this is really cool. This is like, you don't feel this at church that I go to. And I'm like, wow, this must be the anointing. You know, maybe I'm getting anointed now. And so I remember putting my hands up, standing behind this girl that I just met 2 weeks before. And the Lord speaks to me these words that never will ever leave my mind. He said, you will love her like Christ loved the church. And I was thinking, what? Who could do that? You know? I'm like, that's like a suggestion by Paul we're supposed to aspire to, but nobody ever does that. So I'm like, how am I supposed to do that? I'm like, I guess I'm going to be married to her. That was quick. Wow, you found a wife just like that. And I'm honored that I'm going to love her like Christ loved the church, because I think that's the way you're supposed to do it. So I'm like, cool. So ultimately that week we had probably 4 different people that prophesied over us, and the prophecies were all the same. They were basically that we're going to come into this worldwide ministry, flow in the gifts of healing, deliverance, and words of knowledge and prophecy, and that we work with people all over the world. And we had that like 4 different times. Well, the first time you get it, you're kind of like, yeah, right. You probably say that to all the couples, you know. And then the second time you hear it, you're like, from a different person, you're like, I think they're onto something. Third time, you're like, I might be able to take this to the bank. And the fourth time, you're like, wow, it's a done deal. Because I'm thinking they didn't collaborate, I don't think, in all this and try to, you know, surprise me with the same word. So let's pick this person, this couple out and say that. So at that point, I'm thinking, we go home thinking, wow, we're going to have a worldwide ministry. Woohoo! This is going to be fun. This is going to be awesome. We're going to be married. So we end up getting engaged. January 19th. 30 days after we met, which I never would have done. I would have been like normal people and waited and dated for like a year at least, and then, so all these prophecies is like, yeah, you can't make this up. I could hear the Lord really clearly at the time. Well, then he told me to go back to another conference a couple weeks later at the very same hotel. It's at the Grand Old Opryland Hotel in Nashville, Tennessee. It's like the largest hotel east of the Mississippi. Beautiful atrium with all these plants and stuff that smell good, and rivers and stuff with boats you can take. So we go to this conference. This is now held by Judy Jacobs. Who here has heard of Judy Jacobs? The Days of Elijah. She sings that song. She's a spark plug on fire for God. She's out of Cleveland, Tennessee. And so she has a woman that is one of her guest speakers that comes the first night named Glenda Jackson. Glenda Underwood Jackson, who lives in California. And extremely anointed. She met Jesus when she was younger. And the Lord told her that in her latter years of her life, she would prophesy over people, and every word that she spoke would come to pass. And so she's been on the Sid Roth show a bunch of times. She's prophesied over Sid. And so the Lord told me at the end of that day, that night, to go up to her. She'd have a word. So when we did, she's like, oh my, oh my, oh my, oh my. The Lord's showing me you have a marriage made in heaven ordained by God himself. I'm like, what? Who has that? And I'm like, and I was just engaged, like a couple days before that. And I'm like, what? And so then she's like, yeah, you're going to be going all over the world. It's going to be one of the most, largest ministries out there ever. And I'm like, what? And who are we? And and some really specific stuff that has ultimately come to pass. And so anyway, and she said you're going to work with people that have had lives that have been messy, people that have had divorces, people that have been molested sexually and haven't told anybody, and all this stuff, all the stuff that people don't want to talk about, you're going to be dealing with. Yay. I'm like, oh, great, all right. So then we end up finding another person there. The Lord told me I was going to find out when to get married, the date. And this guy came up to us. He said, I'm supposed to talk to you. I'm not sure why. The Lord's highlighting you. What's your story? We share the story. At the end of it, we're like, the only thing we don't know is when to get married. And all of a sudden, he hears the date. Pops in. Wow, that's weird. He goes, I just heard a date. I've never heard a date. Ever. You want to know what it is? I'm like, yeah. March 19th. At the time, it was like January 30th. So it was like 6-7 weeks later. I'm like, wow. So I prayed about it, and it was on a Thursday of all times. A Thursday? I'm like, who gets married on a Thursday? Well, it turned out we had it none of the churches would let us get married because, we didn't, you didn't know us, whatever, and we ended up having to go take some testing from a pastor that married me and my first wife because he knew me. And he said, only if the tests come together will I marry you. And they did. They were very similar. So he ends up marrying us on a Thursday night at a country club because none of the churches were open for us to get married on a Saturday. So we go to a country club to get married. Had we gotten married on a Friday or a Saturday, the fee would have been like $2,500. Because it was a Thursday, it was like $250. So I'm like, aha, that's what God was doing. He was saving money for me. So we had 100 people show up. We get married, and the only thing that I knew about her at that point was that she seemed to be very godly. She knew all these Bible verses. She could pray in tongues. All the great signs we're looking for in a spouse. But she had gone through 3 divorces. And the marriages lasted 5 years, 2 years, and 14 months. The last one actually, he separated in 14 months. He worked for Billy Graham, and then the divorce was a little bit longer after that. But so ultimately, and the only thing that I noticed about her was that she seemed to be a little bit indecisive, a little bit anxious. For a person that knew all this stuff that was supposed to be really strong and powerful. So on our wedding night, we end up having our wedding night, and she changed. And she became really, she started ranting and raging that first night. And I'm like, okay, I'm in bed, she's downstairs ranting and raging for the first time of millions. And I was like, God, what did you do to me? I said, you told me I'm going to love her like Christ loved the church. He said, yes, that's true, you are. He goes, you're going to lay your life down for her in every way imaginable. And she's going to be extremely, extremely abusive of you. She's going to take out all the pain she's had from her dad and her mom and the 3 divorces on you. And you're going to say nothing to any human being on earth. You can't tell anybody. You have to go through it. He said, and in the end, it will all be worth it. And you will have the worldwide ministry I promised. So I'm thinking, well, that doesn't sound fun. I'm like, why didn't you tell me this like last night? He said, well, if I would have told you this last night, you wouldn't have done it. I'm like, well, then you're sneaky. You're like Jehovah sneaky. I'm like, I don't like that. And he's like, well, he goes, it'll be worth it in the end. Someday people will say thank you to you for what you went through. Someday people will know your name around the world. I'm like, well, when's that day? Crickets. You know. I'm like, hello, when's the day? Because then I'm thinking, okay, well, she's just a girl. How bad can it be? You know, she's just a girl. You know, I'm stronger than she is. So then we went on our honeymoon. We actually went to Nashville, Tennessee, and actually we went to Smoky Mountains for the first couple days. Then I had a business conference that was in Coronado Island in San Diego. So I went down there for the second part. And there were some good times we had, and there were a lot of bad times that happened every day. and so like she would just become a different person. She would flip a switch, and all of a sudden, and I could just discern and see that, wait a minute, she thinks I'm like her dad. She thinks I'm like her first husband or second or third husband. I'm like, but I'm not. I'm nice Nelson. You know? even though I'll say with my first wife, I say it was 50-50 because I wasn't completely delivered yet. But the Lord, you see, delivered me before I married my second wife. I didn't know what would happen. I knew something happened to me because I was really, really patient, and I was really more nice than ever. And but I could also start to kind of discern a little bit. But on that wedding night, the Lord allowed me to see her through his eyes, which changed everything, because I could see her that she was hurt by her dad and her mom and her 3 husbands, and that she was just a hurting little girl that had not gotten healed, and that all the pain she had, I was just going to take. And I was going to take it. I wasn't going to go anywhere. I was going to love her no matter how bad she was. And so week after week, it got worse and worse and worse. And after, 3 months, so in June of 2009, she wanted us to get mentored by this guy from Torrance, California, who had mentored her counselor, Robia. If you guys know Robia, she used to be a dancer for Prince, used to be on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Now she's a Christian. She actually made a Christian movie that's going to come out called Unplanned in March. She's actually in Hawaii right now on vacation with her husband, James. But she's awesome. But she used to counsel my wife. And so she wanted to have us mentored by the guy that mentored the woman that was counseling, because she said she was off the charts prophetic. She was amazing. So this guy prays about it, and the Lord said yes to take us on. He would take on maybe 10 people a year or something. And he would work with them as long as the Holy Spirit told him to work with them. Cool. And so he heard the Lord like nobody's business. I have never met anyone in my life. All those that are out there that are famous and stuff, you know, and there's some that are really famous. He would hear better, but he was like an undercover kind of guy. I mean, he wasn't out there. He didn't have his own ministry, although he did. But he was a chiropractor by trade, so it was almost like he was like a Superman kind of thing, where he was like Clark Kent, mild-mannered chiropractor during the day, and then he was like Superman at night. I mean, it was amazing. I mean, and when I first met him, it was on the phone, and on the phone, I was thinking, yeah, who can hear the Lord that clearly? I'm thinking, I was real skeptical. Then he starts to prophesy, speaking about my wife at the time, and he knew everything about the past, and I'm like, okay, well, even Satan probably can do that, you know? And then he actually prophesies about me, and he starts speaking things about me, and I'm like, he's good, he's done his homework, you know? Well, then the second time we had a call, he told me about my son, who, of course, who was a mess, who punched me and was violent, and he was awful. And he told me, he said, well, your son is like you, loving, kind, gentle, and sweet. I was like, you missed that one. You know, there's no way, farther from the truth. You know, he's like, he's evil. And he's like, no, he's not, Nelson. That's not who he really is. That's who he is because he's hearing the voices of these demonic spirits. He was essentially molested when he was 8. And that's allowed that enemy to come in, gave him a legal right. And so he's been hearing those voices ever since, causing him to be horrible to you and his siblings and mom. You know, and I'm like, wait a minute. No one's ever told me that before. I went to these Christian counselors who's supposed to know everything, and they didn't say that. And I've never heard, and my grandmother does deliverance of demons, but she's weird. So I'm like, he seems kind of normal. He's a chiropractor. But... So I'm like, all right, well, let me see. I'm a business guy. I'm like, so what are you telling me? He's like, well, what I'm telling you, Nelson, is you have no clue what your authority is as a Christian. I'm like, he goes, how do you pray? I'm like, well, like everybody else. Please, God, if it's your will. He's like, yeah, those prayers don't work. Right. Those will not cause demons to leave. Right. I'm like, well, then what do I have to do? Like pull him by the hair and grab the demons out and shake him and have him vomit projectile and all this stuff? And he's like, no. He goes, just know your authority. He goes, when you pray, take authority, command the demons to go, and they'll respect you.
Amen.
You have authority over your son because he is your son specifically. He goes, you have more authority than I do. But he said, I know my authority, you don't. So I'll teach you. So in 15 minutes, he taught me something that changed my life forever. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to try this tomorrow. You know, so the next day I asked my son, can I pray for you? And to my shock, he said, yes.
Wow.
And so he's in the back of my SUV, I'm in the front, and my wife's over here. And so I reach around, pray a different prayer like I've never prayed before. And I just said, I command every spirit that's not of the Lord to go in Jesus' name, and I release peace over your mind. And then I looked really closely to see all the demons flying out. And I'm looking really closely. And I don't see them. And I'm like, did they go? I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, how do you know if they went? You know? I'm like, where's that at in the manual? I don't know. And so he didn't tell me about that. And so then I'm like, he just thanked me and left. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess time will tell. He'll be nice to me maybe, you know, who knows? And so I go to bed that night. The next day I go outside to mow the grass, which is something he hadn't done for 2 years, never willingly did it. He comes walking out of the house as I'm halfway done with mowing the grass. So I turn off the mower, brace myself for something horrible again, like he's done a million times before. And instead, these words come out of his mouth that shock me. He says, hey, Dad, can I finish mowing the grass for you?
Wow.
I stared at him for about what seemed like an hour. It was probably like 4 seconds. And I'm like, sure, trying to play cool, not falling and fainting. And then he said, also, I want to go get a haircut and apply for a job at Burger King.
Oh.
And I'm like, what? I'm like, wait a minute. He got fired from the Kroger job I got him like a year ago. I didn't think he'd ever get employed. I thought he'd be in jail or dead by the time he was 20. You know, he was 18 at this time. So I give him the mower. I step away from the mower. I go in the house. I fall to the floor. I start crying. I'm like, Lord, what happened? And he said, you got your son back.
Praise
And I'm like, oh my gosh, 10 years of hell. I'm like, wait a minute. Why didn't you tell me this 10 years ago? You could have saved me a lot of hell in my life. And he said, well, because that's part of your ministry. You had to go through that.
Amen.
He said, in order to get the anointing for that, you had to walk through that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense. So I'm like, so what do I do now with him? He said, just love him, because the mindsets are going to start to heal and mend. And I'm like, okay, do I force him to go to church? Because that's what I've been doing the last, forever since the demonic attack. He said, no, you don't have to have him go to church. Love him. He goes, he will be drawn to your love, and eventually he will come back to the church when it's time. But otherwise, just love him, And I'm like, okay, well, that'll be fun. Well, then immediately I could talk to him. He was not horrible to me. I could have a conversation, and he wasn't disrespectful. He wasn't punching his sister anymore. He wasn't being violent, and it was amazing. So I'm going to show you a picture of him, the before and after, that shows the damage that demons do, and then after what he looks like.
Wow.
And it's amazing. I've shown it, I don't know, thousands and thousands and thousands of times. So this is what you look like when you have demons. You can see the eyes. You can see the eyes. It's kind of cool. It's like, ooh, kind of scary looking. I remember I go out in public with him and try to stand 10 feet behind him or in front of him, go out to the mall, because I'm like, he is not my son, And I couldn't fix him. And the demonic spirits told him that, hey, these gauges they have in his ear, the bigger you make those gauges, the more cool you look. So he got it so big that it tore his earlobe. And so he got the job at Burger King, and he started getting promoted to management, and the ears were dangling, the one ear. And so they made him go to a plastic surgeon to fix it. Actually, I took him to the medical doctor first. His medical doctor looked at it and said, I can't fix that. I'm like, well, sure you can. Just sew it up with some... So he was like, no, I can't do that. And so he had to go to a plastic surgeon. At that time, it was $700 for 1 ear. Wow. And then he kept getting promoted, so they gave him, he had to fix the other ear. It looks kind of weird with one gauge here and normal ear here. So they fixed the other one for $700 more. So that was the before picture, and then this was the after picture.
What a blessing.
Yes.
Wow.
And you can see the eyes are the windows to your soul. So you see the eyes, you can see color blue now instead of black and darkness. And so what's funny, it's interesting, because I've noticed this on Facebook when I get people delivered. You can see the women looks seductive in the eyes. Oftentimes their eyebrows are arched. I can see that, but you can see they're very sexy looking, you know. And a lot of them are in the church. You see them all the time. I love God. And I'm like, wait a minute, you got Jezzy. You know? and then the guys look creepy. I mean, the guys look like creeps. You know, they just do. They're like, I mean, you can see it in the eyes. And they can act all godly and everything. But I'm like, I can pick them out really easily. And so it's like God's way of profiling, you know. It's hard because you can see the demon, the eyes are the windows of the soul. Because when people don't see that anymore in your eyes, and they're like, there's a pure person, I can tell it. And when you get delivered and stuff, it's like the impure spirit in you that draws you to the impure spirit in someone else is gone. Now you can discern, wait a minute. So if you're an Ahab, which oftentimes Ahabs will draw to the Jezebels. That's what happens. Like in 80% of marriages, Jezebels and Ahabs. You have a controlling person married to one that allows himself to be controlled. You have a giver married to a taker, you know, in relationships. And so when you get delivered, it's like you don't draw to a person that's unhealthy and pure anymore. Because my default was Ahab, even though I had some Jezebel and Leviathan, which I'm going to go through in a minute. So ultimately, my wife kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse instead of better. And she ended up like pushing me down, shoving me down. She would throw knives at me. She would throw glasses at me. She would scar my arm if I didn't do what she wanted. And she would berate me. Mainly it was verbal abuse. But it was interesting because what she would say to me, I always would say, that sounds like Satan himself would say that. Why is she so evil with these things, you know? And then she'd act all sweet and nice in front of the church and going to these conferences, and they'd all say, wow, you're so lucky to be married to her. She's so sweet. And I'd have to play with it and go along with it and say, yeah, thinking in my mind, yeah, you should be so lucky to be married to her, you know? It's like, she's evil, you know. And I didn't know what she had because God wouldn't tell me. So I remember once I was actually in Huntington Beach at the Hyatt Regency, you know, beautiful hotel, people were getting married there. While she was like throwing her phone at me and yelling at me, and then we'd go out to dinner and she'd be nice for a little while, go back to the room, she'd be mean, start berating me again, and then I'd want to leave the room, and then she wouldn't let me and trying to pull me back in. I'm like, you're crazy, you know. And I remember I finally broke free and ran outside the hallway, and she starts to chase me down the hallway at the Hyatt Regency in Huntington Beach, and I'm like, what is going on? This woman's crazy, you know. And so I outrun her because I used to run marathons, so I could outlast her, and I lost her in probably 10 minutes. And it's a long time too, 10 minutes of running, but I lost her. I was in a stairwell down to the basement, and I was just crying for like 3 hours, saying, Lord, why? You know, my son got delivered, but I pray for her. It doesn't work. Why? And all he kept saying is, well, it'll be worth it in the end. And I'm like, well, is the end near? So I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore because this is not fun. So that was like about 2 years into it. Then it became 3 years. Then it became 4 years. Then it became 5 years.
Wow.
And then he started to give her a chance to change because he told me that I could finally release it to a person, which the first person that I released it to was the pastor that married us, because she wanted us to get help. Us help. And I'm like, really? You? I'm sorry, it's not us. And so, but she couldn't see it. It was like always, you know, what part? She always asked me, what percentage of the problem in our marriage do you think is me? And I'm like, okay, what do I say? If I'm real, I'd say like 99.9%, but she'll kill me if I say that. So 80%, you know. So I said 80. I'm like, hey, listen, I'm taking 20, and I don't even think I should own, you know. So ultimately, we told my pastor about it. She told a bunch of lies about me to him. So, and he lived like an hour away, so he couldn't change her. And so she didn't. So then a couple months later, the Lord said, now tell the pastor of your church. I'm like, oh no, she'll kill me if I tell the truth. So I told the pastor of our church, and of course he thought it was crazy. He was like, what? Like, because it's so absurd, some of the stuff she would do, and she looks all sweet and nice at church. So then she tells her version once she finds out that I told him, and then he doesn't know who to believe. And I'm like, man, she's good. I'm like, so then I said, okay, you need to talk to Robia. So then he talked to Robia, and then she validated for me. She's like, she was the #1 hardest person I'd ever counseled in my life. Of 500 plus women, no one came anywhere close to her. She goes, #1 was here, and then everybody else is down here. And she goes, because she would lie, she wouldn't be honest, and she said I couldn't make her improve. You know, so it was just very frustrating, and they would spend hours and hours and hours with her and stuff. So ultimately, he didn't know who to believe until he talked to her. Then he knew who to believe. Well, once he knew the truth, what do you think she did? We got to change churches now. No. I'm like, no, he knows the truth. No, we're going to change you. So we had to change churches. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So then eventually the Lord said, tell her best friend. I'm like, no, my best friend, I can't do that. And it was like 30 years. It was like her spiritual mom. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't do this, I can't do this. The Lord's like, you got to. So I ended up telling her best friend a little bit about what I went through. And she's like, what, Nelson? She goes, one time when she was trying to beat down the door to get you, she accidentally butt dialed me, and I heard the whole thing. And I'm like, yes, there is a God, you know. Oh. And so she knew the truth. And so then eventually she confronted my wife, and then my wife, master liar that she is, she should be in Hollywood actually, because she was so good at lying. And so she lied and spun things and everything. Well, then the next time I talked to her best friend laughed at me and said, yeah, Nelson, I heard the truth, and you know, you were really exaggerating. I'm like, what? No, I wasn't. I go, I didn't tell you all the gory details. I'm like, I just told you the highlights. And so it didn't change her. So then finally, the last final straw was she's trying to stop me from doing ministry. Like I was praying for people and seeing some healings. And she was getting jealous of it. And so she was like, well, what kind of faith do you think you have on a scale of 1 to 10 versus me? And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a no-win question right there. So I'm like, I don't know, I'm an 8, you're a 6. What do you think Robia is? I don't know, a 10. Ah, you love Robia. I'm like, no, I don't. I go, that's just being honest. It's like, oh my God. And she's married too. I was like, what the? So anyway, ultimately, the final straw was when she said, and there was times I didn't come home at night because it would be better to sleep in my SUV in the back of it, or it'd be better to sleep down the street in the mulch of our playground in the neighborhood than it would be to be in the corner top of a house with a contentious woman. They should change that verse in Proverbs, I think. Because if you stay outside the house versus the corner, you don't hear the yelling and the screaming anymore. Because otherwise, when you're in the house, you can hear the berating and stuff. So ultimately, the final straw came on January 23rd, 2015. And again, mind you, whenever we had people around us, she would be like Mother Teresa. So if my kids were there, we had relatives over, she would be sweet and nice. As soon as they were gone, back to Attila the Hun or whatever. So ultimately, on January 23rd, she tried to kick me out of my bed, said I couldn't sleep there anymore. And so I'm like, well, gee, part of the time I don't even sleep there anyway. So I'm like, but I'm not going to let you tell me that. So, and she was trying to stop me from doing ministry completely. She goes, we have to work on our marriage. I'm like, no, you have to work on you, whatever's wrong with you. And there's times, I remember she would tell me that she could hear the enemy telling her bad things about me. And I'm like, well, there's your clue. If you know it's the enemy, why are you listening? I go, all I'm hearing is the voices telling me I should divorce you because you're crazy, and you are, you know. I remember once I told her that, she's like, crazy? I'll show you crazy. I'm like, oh no, you're not crazy, I'm crazy. You're normal, you know. And so finally, after all that, the Lord said to me, January 23rd, 2015, I'll never forget it, I went to go to the UPS store, and then the Lord told me, you need to separate. I'm like, what? No! I go, I don't want to separate. I go, I've loved her like Christ loved the church. I went through hell. I go, what the heck? No separation. Get her delivered. He's like, no, it's not going to work that way. I'm like, what? I go, you're bad. I don't like you, you know? He's like, no, trust me. He goes, it'll be good. He said, because I'm going to have you separate, and I'm going to start to set the ministry up around the world through you. It will grow rapidly, and people all around the world are going to start to get delivered from what she has, but often to a lesser degree. And he goes, but she's going to lie about you horribly. She's going to tarnish your reputation, and everybody's going to believe it. And I'm like, what? I go, what? After all I did for her? I took on $85,000 worth of debt from her sons. I went into debt $85,000 because I paid for a bunch of their stuff, schooling and discounted rates on their rent. And one year they couldn't even pay rent, so I had to pay the whole thing and all utilities. And so I just kept helping, loving them like Christ loved the church, and sacrificing. And so finally, when he said that, I was thinking, well, she'll probably come to her knees and repent and say, I'm sorry. And because I knew she loved me, because she said, you're the best husband I ever had. And I'm like, okay, what does that mean, you know? I love you, but yet I hate you too, you know? So a love-hate relationship, all within the same person. So ultimately, I came home, I told her, I'm leaving, I'm separating. I don't want to, I love you, but that whatever's inside you, that demon, it hates me, and I can't live with it anymore. So immediately, instead of her falling to her knees saying, I'm sorry, she ends up grabbing my pillow and throwing it at me, saying, get out. Really? So I took in 15 minutes, minimal stuff, put it in my car. I call a friend, a 91-year-old guy now, he's not going to be 92, who knew both of us, and he said, yeah, you can come over, live at my house. So I thought it was going to be most a week. And so I separated, and she starts lying about me immediately, telling people she kicked me out. and whatever other lies. I don't know what, but I didn't even want to know what the lies were. But she changed the locks. I mean, she really was selling it. She took my stuff and she put it in storage. And I'm like, what? What did you do that for? Like within a week she did that. I'm like, what did you do that for? I'm like, I'm coming back home as soon as we get fixed. You get fixed, you know. And so we end up going to a counselor at our church, a pastor. The senior pastor refused to meet with us because she already lied about me. And so he started believing these lies. And so I met with his son-in-law one time, and then she told me that the only way she would agree to go into counseling with him is if I didn't tell any bad things she did.
Wow.
It's like, what? I'm like, wow, the audacity of you. So I'm like, sure, honey, I won't tell the bad things about you. I'm like, that's why I'm separated, is because you didn't do any bad things. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I separated, and then we actually went to counseling, and I remember I brought up a little bit of the bad stuff she did, and she threatened to walk out. I was like, oh, he's being mean to me. And I'm like, what? And then this big guy, is a professional wrestler, 500-pound guy, was like, now, Nelson, now, we've all done bad things. I'm like, he goes, yeah, I even punched a hole in the wall once. I'm like, what? I didn't do that. I'm like, who are you? Well, you're a wrestler. That's why you did that, you know? You got your own problems, you know? So, oh my gosh. And so we met one more time. We met the other one more time, I remember. In fact, her son and I were great friends. Her son called me right after that. She's like, oh, don't talk to him. Don't talk to him. Don't tell him we were counseling. I'm like, what? What lie did she say that she doesn't want to say that we're counseling? I'm like, and then he wanted me to come over and help him with his taxes, you know, because he loved me. He knew I was a good guy. He knew his mom had issues, whatever. So ultimately, we went one more time with this counselor. She said, we have to meet. They changed the time to like an hour later. Well, something in my spirit started to discern something. I'm like, I think she's lying. I'm going to show up on time. And when I did, she was there. And she was meeting with him, colluding, lying about me before I came in. So I caught them. And I confronted them. That was the last time we ever had a counseling session. And then she was lying to people at the church, and I was still going there for a while, and she was acting all scared of me. And I'm like, really? And I'm like, you're such a good liar. You know, I'm like, I can't even do that, you know, because I don't have that in me. So ultimately, after all that, she then filed for divorce. And I'm like, wow, great. You know, you're going to throw all this out. I'm like, well, I'm going to do what God told me to do. You know, and so ultimately I fought the divorce as much as I could, trying to see she would come to the end of herself and get delivered. The pastor encouraged her to divorce me. And I'm like, really? And I even told him, this is what she's got. It's Jezebel. Because actually, after 2 weeks of separation, the Lord told me what she had. Spirit of Jezebel and spirit of Leviathan. I had never heard of Leviathan in my life. No, Job 41, never read it in my life. No pastors ever talked about it ever in any church I went to. And I'll read a little bit of it. I'm not going to read the whole thing, Job 41, because a lot of people don't know about Leviathan. A lot of people have heard about Jezebel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings. A lot of people don't know Jezebel is also mentioned in Revelations chapter 2, 18 to 23, where God is talking about being very severe with people that have Jezebel, because he's not going to tolerate that. So... and I'll get to that too. So Job 41, the last two verses 33 through 34, says, on earth, and it's describing like an alligator, is how it's describing this spirit, that it's got scales, it's very hard to kill and defeat, it's very scary, and its scales are its pride, it talks about. But the last two verses says, on earth there is nothing like him, which is, talking about Leviathan, which is made without fear. He beholds every high thing, which is prideful thing. He is king over all the children of pride. So whenever we have pride, it's the spirit of Leviathan that is behind that. And of course, you know, I'm like, she had pride. She had pride, her dad had pride, her mom had pride, the brother had pride, the sister had pride. You know, I'm like, there's a lot of pride going on there. You know, and I used to be prideful with my first wife. I can admit that. You know, most of us have pride to some degree that we just don't want to admit that we have. So ultimately, after I read that and I did more research on the Jezebel spirit, I read Unmasking the Jezebel Spirit by John Paul Jackson. I watched a video by Robert Morris from Gateway Church in Dallas, and everything they were described my wife to a T. And I'm like, she's got this. So I'm like, I'm going to help her. So I emailed her. She denied that she had it. You know, I copied her friend on it. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So ultimately, she lied about me. She filed for divorce. I tried to stop it. It went through in November 2015. I was sad because I'm like, I went through all this hell for nothing, God? I'm like, what the heck? I go, I didn't want to be married twice, let alone, I don't want to go for a third one, so I'm like, what the heck? So ultimately, then the Lord gave me this revelation. And because all the books I was reading described the spirit and what the behaviors were, but there's only a few that talked about how to get delivered, and like none that talked about how you get the spirits. So I'm like, well, I want to know, because I'm a business kind of guy. If I'm going to be helping people get delivered from this, how do you get it? Do you go under the Jezebel tree and it jumps on you? Do you go swimming in the ocean and it jumps on you, the Leviathan spirit, because it's an alligator kind of thing is what it is. And also I'll say this, the Lord wants me to, if you have any dreams, a lot of dreams and stuff and visions of snakes, it represents Jezebel. If you have alligator dreams and stuff, it's Leviathan. So it's kind of the way the Lord kind of shows you what you're dealing with. Kind of a clue, basically. And so the Lord said, this is how you get the Spirit. He said, how you get the Spirit, Nelson, is by growing up with father wounds, mother wounds, pain, sexual, being touched inappropriately, violated, so it could be incest. You could have been touched when you were a year old and not even know it, be completely oblivious. You could have been raped, you could have been, touched inappropriately, molested, whatever you want to call it. You could have been hurt by your stepfather, stepmother, words that they say. You could have just felt rejected. Like your father and mother could have been working a lot, and then you simply don't have a good relationship because they were working all the time. So they weren't really around you, didn't spend much time. So there's a myriad of ways that you can pick up these spirits. So unless you had a really good daddy, a really good mommy, and a really good grandparents on both sides, and oftentimes great-grandparents that were very godly and loving in every way, then most chances you're going to pick up some of these spirits. Jezebel, Leviathan, and Ahab are like the three strong men that are out there that the enemy has. And so what the Lord showed me is that after he described this, he said, this is how it works. He said, when you get hurt by a parent or by someone that's supposed to love you, and it could be someone you don't even know that molests you or rapes you, he said, what that does is you start to have thoughts that are chimed into by the enemy. So when you're growing up and say you're a little girl and you have a daddy that's not the way that he should be, then you're going to have normal thoughts saying, why doesn't my daddy love me? And I'm trying to be the best I can. I can't do anything. And then you'll hear the voice of the enemy sounding like your voice saying, your daddy doesn't love you. And that could have been a complete lie. He could have been busy working. But of course, he could be doing some things that are really harmful, that hurt you. And then in that case, you're like, yeah, you can't trust your daddy. Your daddy didn't want you. Your daddy wanted a boy instead of a girl. And all these things, because they'll have 90% of what they say oftentimes the truth, but then 10% is the lie. And so that's how he sells it to us. And we're just little kids growing up, so we can't discern voices of the enemy versus ours. And so a lot of that stuff's coming from the enemy, and we think those thoughts. And so as you grow older, if you're a girl and you got hurt by your daddy, then the thought will tell you that you can't trust men like your dad. And you end up getting into a dating relationship and you get married, and that voice is still telling you can't trust your dad or your husband. He's just like your dad. He didn't love you. He's not going to protect you. And then you start saying things out because he's telling you to do these things, and it causes striving and fighting and arguing within your relationship. And you don't know it. You're like a little puppet, and the enemy's whispering to you the whole time because it's hard to discern. The Bible says take every thought captive. But what if you don't know the thought? If it's coming from the enemy, you're not going to discern it. And of course, the enemy's going to be very sly. He's not going to say, hi, I'm a demon, buy this. And you're like, what? You're a demon. I'm not going to believe that. So it sounds just like your voice, or like your thoughts. And so as you get older, it causes all this striving and fighting and arguing in your relationships. And then the spirit of pride will tell you things like, well, you're better than that person. You would never do that. Yeah, I wouldn't. Yes. In fact, you deserve this instead of that. Yes, I do. Yes. In fact, your husband, he should drop you off at the front instead of dropping you back here 20 feet farther. Yes, yeah, I'm a princess, aren't you? Yes, I'm a princess, And so it's like how rude that husband is. Yes. And so you hear all of these voices and you don't discern it. And guys, of course, I've talked to guys that have had times where either their sisters molested them or they've had a sleepover at their pastor's house and their pastor's son molested them and did something to them when they were 6 years old and they didn't tell anybody. I had this one guy from Houston, and he was molested by his sister. He was like 8, she was 15. He didn't tell anybody. And so as he grew up, he kept hearing the voices tell him. In fact, when I met him, they were on the verge of divorce. They were married for like 20 years. Beautiful woman, very sweet, very godly. And he was like controlling, manipulative. He would call home all the time, checking on her to make sure she wasn't having sex with somebody. And she's like, really? I'm not having sex with anybody. Stop this, For years he did that. he'd be mad and stuff. Well, then he got delivered before I went on my TV show. And I explained to him, how this works. And then within seconds, he got healed. I mean, he got instantly delivered, but then he got healed. He had pain down here, pain in his chest. It was gone because the demons left. And the demons always cause pain, especially Leviathan. And so he got changed instantly. He no longer called his wife every day, thinking she was, because he didn't hear the voices up here anymore. So he was a different person. They changed the entire marriage. It saved the marriage. They were at peace now. There's no more striving. So when you strive about anything, you're hearing the demonic voice of something, a demon, because it's causing you to get into fear, get into worry, get into anger, wanting to control somebody. Because oftentimes the Jezebel spirit wants you to control other people so they won't hurt you like you were hurt from your dad or your mom, and so how do you get delivered from all this stuff? Well, I'm going to read through this characteristics first, and then I'm going to talk about how you get delivered from it, because it's not that hard, but yet it is. So it's like the hardest thing you can do, but it can also be really easy. That's why I'm seeing probably 60% the first time they hear this message get delivered the first time. And it takes the others a little bit longer as the spirit is telling them, you don't have this is baloney. Or it puts them to sleep so they can't hear it.
Wow.
It's like, I can't hear, or it distorts things, and so you have to listen to it a second time or a third time. So here we go. I know, people are laughing back there. If you have the spirit of Jezebel, these are the characteristics. And again, you have to be honest with yourself. You have to listen to this and say, do I have any of these characteristics? I had a lot of Jezebel and Leviathan with my first wife. I had stronger default to Ahab. You'll always have a stronger default to either Ahab or Jezebel. You will not be a 50-50 person. And oftentimes you can vacillate between the two. Because if you're around your parents that hurt you, you have to be an Ahab around them. Once you leave their home, you become the Jezebel that whoever was that had Jezebel, mom or dad. Yes, because you're hearing the same demonic voices that they heard, that their grandparents heard, that it goes on and on, back to Adam and Eve. So Jezebel causes us to control other people, because we don't trust other people to make the decisions that are going to be best for us, because our dad or our mom didn't protect us. So we can't trust anybody. And oh my gosh, that resonates with so many people, like, yes, I had to do that. Oh my goodness. So you feel you have to control other people so that you won't be hurt by them again. You are manipulative, and it can be a subtle manipulation where you'll just suggest something to get your way. So ultimately you may say something like, honey, it'd be probably pretty good if we end up eating at this one restaurant, and knowing full well that maybe it's his turn to choose what restaurant to eat at. And they'll come up with some reasons, like it's closer to this or that, and then you're like, all right, I guess we can eat there, the Ahab that they are. And then that's a manipulation tool, and people do this all the time. They know how to manipulate, that spirit does in them. The other thing is they're very anxious and fearful. That always comes in, because that's how you get the spirit, is you have to have some trauma in order to obtain the spirit. Like my son got the trauma because of what happened to him. He was an innocent victim. We're all innocent victims when we grow up, but the enemy comes in through our dads or our moms or step-parents or people that rape us, molest us, whatever, and that's how that comes in. But you always get the spirit of fear. So oftentimes people will go into churches and say, I'm fearful, I'm anxious, I'm taking all this medication, and they pray, oh, you don't have a spirit of fear, you have a sound mind in Jesus' name. Yes. Well, then what happens? Well, that spirit, they may temporarily leave the fear, but because Jezebel's still in charge, it gets to come back. You have to get the strong man out. Otherwise, it doesn't matter all day long. All these things I'm describing here, they are individual demonic spirits. And there's probably way more than this, because there's like gazillions of demons.